Now, it never rains, but it pours for our embattled Chancellor Rachel Reeves because the reality of a potential recession is now intensifying as business leaders express worries about the impacts of upcoming tax changes on economic growth.
You're betraying the families of fallen heroes. These words, spat out by a caller on live radio, left Rachel Reeves visibly shaken, but it was just the beginning of her ordeal. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. As more callers piled on, the true extent of public fury over Labor's military tax proposal became clear. What started as a defensive policy quickly spiraled into a referendum on political values. How did Reeves handle the onslaught, and what does it mean for Labor's future? Rachel Reeves walked into the radio studio with an air of confidence. She'd defended Labor's military tax proposal countless times before, and today would be no different, or so she thought. As she settled into her chair, adjusting her microphone, the host's introduction hinted at the storm brewing just beyond the soundproof walls. We're joined today by Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves to discuss Labor's controversial plan to tax military pensions. Our phone lines are lighting up, so let's go straight to our first caller. The moment the caller's voice crackled through the speakers, Reeves knew this wasn't going to be a typical interview.
The Chancellor Rachel Reeves lied on her CV, claiming to have been an economist at Halifax Bank, when it turns out she worked in the complaints department. Well, getting angry complaints is something she'll need to get used to, given her budget for growth has proved about as unpopular as a Prince Andrew backstage meet and greet. After all, Rachel Reeves has enraged 10 million pensioners by axing their winter fuel payments, enraged farmers with an inheritance tax raid, and enraged business with a hike on employer national insurance contributions, which the boss of Deutsche Bank this week called a payroll tax, which may lead to 100,000 workers facing unemployment.
My husband died serving this country. The woman's voice trembled with raw emotion. And now you want to take from what little he left behind. Reeves's carefully prepared statements suddenly felt hollow in the face of such genuine grief. She fumbled for words, trying to explain the economic rationale behind the policy, but each attempt only seemed to fuel the caller's anger. You're betraying the families of fallen heroes. The widow spat, her voice rising. How dare you sit there and talk about percentages when we're talking about people's lives? The host, sensing the shift in momentum, pounced. Ms. Reeves, how do you respond to the accusation that this policy is fundamentally immoral?
I got into trouble when I was in opposition. Before they took over, so I used to say nice things about Rachel Reeves, a good, sensible woman, and she's still a very nice woman, and good and sensible. She's as boring as her Prime Minister, but that's a problem for the whole government. But she really disappointed me. It was bound to be an unpopular budget. She'd made this stupid promise not to use the normal toolbox of every chancellor. Mm-hmm. Apparently, she wasn't going to raise income tax, she wasn't going to raise VAT, she wasn't going to raise national insurance, corporation tax. That's 70% of the revenue.
So it was the mistakes in the election.
Enormous taxes on employers. I would have raised, I think, VAT and fuel tax.
Reeves's composure began to crack. She'd faced tough questions before, but this was different. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was about values, about the very soul of the Labour Party. As she struggled to find a response that wouldn't make things worse, social media exploded. Yacht Reeves' betrayal live began trending within minutes. Comments flooded in, each more scathing than the last. Labour's lost its way, one tweet read. They used to stand for the working class, now they're robbing war widows. As the show cut to a commercial break, Reeves slumped in her chair, the weight of public outrage bearing down on her. She'd come to defend a policy, but now found herself defending the very principles of her party. And this was just the first caller. The producer's voice came through her headphones. We've got a veteran on the line next. Are you ready to continue? Reeves nodded, steeling herself. But as she looked at the blinking lights on the phone panel, each representing another angry voice waiting to be heard, she realized a chilling truth. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was a referendum on Labor's values, played out in real time on national radio. The commercial break ended, and Rachel Reeves found herself thrust back into the lion's den. The blinking lights on the phone panel seemed to pulse with the collective collective anger of a nation. As the next caller's voice crackled through the studio, it became clear that this wasn't just about a single policy anymore. This was a referendum on Labor's very soul. "My name's John, and I've served in the Royal Marines for 15 years, the caller began, his voice steady but laced with barely contained fury. "Ms. Reeves, can you look me in the eye? Well, through the radio, and tell me why my pension is suddenly fair game for your economic experiments." Reeves, still reeling from the previous onslaught, stumbled through a response about economic necessity and fair burden sharing, but her words rang hollow against the raw emotion in John's voice. As she spoke, social media exploded. Reeves' Betrayal Live began trending nationwide, with clips of her fumbling responses going viral faster than she could backpedal. The host, sensing blood in the water, pounced. "Ms. Reeves, you've talked about economic necessity, but what about moral necessity? Aren't you betraying the very people who've sacrificed the most for this country?" It was a loaded question, and Reeves knew it. She tried to pivot to talk about Labor's broader vision for the country, but each attempt to change the subject only seemed to fuel the public's anger. The calls kept coming. A nurse, a teacher, a factory worker, each one united in their condemnation of a party they felt had lost its way. As the barrage continued, a chilling realization dawned. This wasn't just about Rachel Reeves anymore. This was about a fundamental disconnect between the political class and the people they claimed to serve. The Labor Party, once the champion of the working class, now stood accused of betraying its core values. The final blow came from a caller named Sarah. Her voice trembled as she spoke, not with anger, but with disappointment. "Ms. Reeves, I voted Labor all my life. My parents voted Labor. But today I have to ask, have you forgotten who you serve?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Reeves, visibly shaken, struggled to form a coherent response. As the host announced the end of the segment, she slumped in her chair, the weight of public outrage bearing down on her shoulders. In the span of a single radio interview, Rachel Reeves had become the face of a party in crisis. As clips of her disastrous performance spread across social media, political analysts scrambled to assess the damage. Could Labor recover from this? Or had they irreparably damaged their relationship with the very people they claimed to represent? As the dust settles on Rachel Reeves' disastrous radio appearance, the implications for Labor's future loom large. This confrontation has exposed a gaping chasm between politicians and the public they claim to serve. Reeves' fumbling responses and the caller's raw emotions paint a picture of a party desperately out of touch with its core supporters. The power of public opinion, amplified by social media, has turned a single interview into a potential turning point for Labor. Critics argue that while Reeves seems eager to burden hardworking citizens with more taxes, there's little accountability for issues like illegal immigration. This perceived inconsistency has only fueled the fire of public frustration. As clips of Reeves' meltdown continue to circulate online, the question on everyone's lips is clear. Will this be the wake-up call Labor needs, or the beginning of its downfall?